across the galaxy, there is a rule no empire dares to test for long. It is not written into law, not enforced by fleets, and not backed by any known authority. It exists in fragments, corrupted data archives, abandoned navigation logs, and warnings passed quietly between captains who have seen too much to speak openly. The rule is simple: do not approach Earth's borders. No one agrees on when the warning began. Some claim it predates modern civilizations, others insist it emerged only after the first wave of interstellar expansion. What all accounts share is the same pattern: ships that went too close never returned. Not damaged, not destroyed. Just gone, as if they had never existed. Entire expeditions vanished without debris fields, without energy signatures, without even a final signal strong enough to trace. Automated probes sent to investigate recorded nothing unusual. No radiation spikes. No gravitational distortion. No detectable anomaly. Space appeared perfectly empty, perfectly normal. And yet, every attempt to cross a certain invisible threshold ended the same way: silence. At first, the phenomenon was dismissed as coincidence, then as navigational error, then as classified weapon testing by unknown powers. But as centuries passed and the disappearances continued across different species, technologies, and regions of space, a consensus quietly formed. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a weapon. It was something else, something that did not leave evidence behind. Most civilizations adapted. Trade routes curved wide around the solar system. Exploration maps marked the region as restricted without explanation. The closer one got to Earth, the fewer records existed. It became a void not just in space, but in knowledge. No one wanted to study it too closely. No one wanted to be the next missing fleet. And then there were the transmissions. Rare, fragmented, and often incomplete. Ships that approached the boundary sometimes managed to send brief, broken messages before disappearing. None described a battle. None reported hostile contact in any conventional sense. Instead, they spoke of confusion, of instruments failing to register something that seemed present, of moments where reality itself felt unstable, of an awareness that something was there but could not be seen. Those messages didn't last long. They always ended the same way, cut off mid-sentence. Over time, the warning about Earth stopped being questioned. It simply became part of how the galaxy functioned. Some called it superstition. Others called it survival. Either way, it was obeyed. Except by those who believed themselves beyond such fears. The Varex Dominion had risen faster than any power in recent history. Their fleets spanned multiple systems, their technology surpassed most known civilizations, and their doctrine was built on one principle: nothing exists that cannot be understood, and nothing understood cannot be controlled. To them, the warning surrounding Earth was an insult to reason. They studied the data, what little remained of it. Missing ships without evidence. Distress signals without context. Entire regions of space avoided without explanation. To Dominion analysts, it was obvious: this was not proof of danger. It was proof of ignorance. A myth reinforced by fear and repetition. Their leadership concluded what others were too cautious to admit. If something truly existed at Earth's borders, it would leave measurable traces. Energy, matter displacement, gravitational distortion, something. The absence of evidence was, in their view, the strongest evidence of all. There was nothing there. And if there was nothing there, then Earth itself was unclaimed territory, isolated, unprotected, and vulnerable. The decision was unanimous. A full-scale expeditionary fleet would be deployed. Not a probe, not a scouting party, but an overwhelming force designed to establish immediate control. If Earth held resources or strategic value, it would be secured. If it held a native species, they would be evaluated. And if the warnings held any truth at all, the Dominion would uncover it and prove, once and for all, that the galaxy had been hiding from shadows. The fleet assembled at the edge of map space, hundreds of vessels moving in perfect coordination. Command ships, carriers, escorts, each one equipped with the most advanced detection systems ever constructed. They would not be caught off guard by something invisible. They would measure it, define it, and if necessary, eliminate it. As they approached the outer limits of the solar system, long-range scans were initiated. Every frequency was monitored. Every particle fluctuation was recorded. The data came back clean. No anomalies. No distortions. Nothing that deviated from normal space. The closer they moved, the more confident they became. The so-called boundaries showed no signs of existence. No markers. No change in environment. It was, by every measurable standard, empty. Within the fleet, the warnings became a subject of quiet amusement. Generations of civilizations had avoided this region out of fear of something that wasn't even there. Entire sectors of space left unexplored because of stories and incomplete data. The lead command vessel issued the final order. Maintain formation. Continue advance. Cross the projected threshold. Sensors remained stable. Communications remained clear. Every system functioned exactly as expected. For a moment, it seemed the galaxy had been wrong. And then, without warning, everything changed. The fleet crossed the projected boundary in perfect formation, engines steady, shields active, sensors sweeping every measurable layer of space. There was no visible transition, no distortion marking the threshold. One moment they were outside, the next they were inside, and nothing changed. Command crews exchanged confirmations. All systems normal. No interference. No unidentified signals. The silence of space remained absolute. For several minutes, the advance continued without incident. Confidence solidified across the fleet. The warnings, the disappearances, the centuries of avoidance, it all collapsed under the weight of observable reality. There was nothing here. Then the first anomaly occurred. A capital ship in the second formation transmitted a routine status update. Mid-sentence, the signal cut. Not distorted. Not interrupted. It simply ended. Attempts to re-establish contact failed instantly. Sensors locked onto its last known position. There was nothing there. No debris. No residual energy. No thermal signature. The ship had not exploded, had not warped, had not moved. It had ceased to exist between one moment and the next. Command ordered an immediate halt. Formation broke as vessels adjusted position, scanning the surrounding space with increased intensity. Every detection system was pushed beyond standard limits. Still nothing registered. A second ship vanished. This time, multiple vessels were watching. Visual feeds, sensor arrays, telemetry logs, all recorded the same impossible event. One frame the ship was present. The next frame it was gone. No transition. No delay. Silence spread across the fleet, replacing earlier confidence. Command attempted to rationalize the situation. Cloaking technology, unknown weapons, spatial distortion fields. But every theory required evidence, and there was none. Then the disappearances accelerated. 3 ships at the outer edge of the formation vanished within seconds of each other. Communications flooded the network, overlapping reports, conflicting data, rising panic. Crews began running full diagnostic cycles, searching for internal failure, external attack, anything that could explain what was happening. Nothing appeared. Orders shifted from advance to containment. The fleet began pulling back, engines reversing course toward the boundary they had just crossed. But as ships attempted to retreat, something became clear. The disappearances were not random. They were selective. Vessels closest to the invisible threshold vanished first, followed by those attempting to cross back. It was as if proximity triggered attention, something responding to movement across a line no sensor could detect. A destroyer initiated an emergency warp jump, pushing its engines beyond safe limits. The drive engaged for less than a second before the ship disappeared entirely, leaving behind no trace of its attempt. Communications began to fracture. Signals dropped without warning, channels collapsed into static, and messages arrived incomplete or out of sequence. Some transmissions looped fragments of earlier dialogue, as if time itself was no longer consistent. Amid the chaos, a pattern of reports began to emerge from surviving crews. Something was there. Not visible. Not measurable. But present. Sensor officers described brief spikes that didn't register as energy or matter. Visual systems flickered with shapes that could not be resolved. Some crews reported a sensation, an awareness pressing against the edge of perception, something observing without being seen. A command vessel attempted to deploy autonomous drones beyond the fleet's position. The drones transmitted clear data for exactly 3 seconds before vanishing one by one, each loss occurring at slightly different distances, as if testing boundaries that shifted in real time. Panic overtook discipline. Ships broke formation, attempting evasive maneuvers in all directions. Some accelerated deeper into the system. Others tried to retreat at maximum velocity. It made no difference. They vanished the same way. No explosion. No resistance. No fight. Final transmissions began to slip through the collapsing network, fragmented, desperate, and increasingly incoherent. One officer reported that the empty space ahead of them was wrong, that it moved without movement. Another insisted something was closer than distance should allow. The last coherent message from the fleet came from the Central Command vessel. Its signal was stable for a fraction longer than the others. It described the same conclusion every crew had reached too late. This was not an attack. There was no enemy to target, no system to disable, no force to resist. Something had noticed them. The transmission ended mid-word. And then there was nothing. No signals. No wreckage. No surviving vessels. The entire fleet was gone, leaving behind only empty space that looked exactly as it had before they arrived. Earth had been watching the entire time. Long before the Varex Dominion assembled its fleet, long before the first ship crossed the invisible threshold, human systems had already identified their approach. Deep space monitoring arrays tracked every movement with quiet precision, recording formation patterns, signal frequencies, and energy outputs. There was no alarm, no emergency response, no attempt to intercept. Only observation. When the first alien vessel vanished, human operators did not react. There were no sudden commands, no confusion in the data feeds. The disappearance was logged, timestamped, and compared against thousands of similar events archived over decades. The pattern matched exactly. Nothing unexpected was happening. The truth was simple, but it had taken humanity generations to understand it. The boundary surrounding Earth was never built. It had been discovered. Early in humanity's expansion beyond their own planet, exploratory missions had encountered the same phenomenon now consuming the Dominion fleet. At first, it had been dismissed as malfunction, lost probes, missing signals, corrupted telemetry. But as missions pushed farther and the losses became undeniable, a different conclusion emerged. Something existed at the edge of their reach. It could not be seen, measured, or communicated with. It did not respond to signals, did not react to weapons testing, did not behave like any known force or entity. Yet its effect was absolute. Anything that crossed a specific threshold simply ceased to exist. Humanity tried to fight it. Unmanned drones were sent first, then shielded vessels, then heavily armed expeditions equipped with experimental technologies designed to detect or disrupt unknown phenomena. None of it mattered. The outcome never changed. Cross the line, and you were gone. It wasn't immediate in every case. Sometimes there was a delay, seconds, minutes, rarely longer. But once the boundary was crossed, the result was inevitable. For years, humanity treated it as a problem to solve. Entire research divisions were dedicated to understanding its nature. Theories ranged from higher-dimensional anomalies to autonomous defense systems left behind by extinct civilizations. None could be proven. None could be tested safely. Then came the realization that changed everything. The phenomenon did not target everything equally. Objects originating from outside the boundary were always affected. Probes sent from beyond, foreign signals, external transmissions, all were subject to disappearance once they crossed the threshold. But objects originating from within the boundary behaved differently. Human ships, launched from Earth and operating outward, could approach the threshold without triggering the effect, at least not immediately. The closer they moved to the boundary, the more unstable conditions became, but they were not erased the way external objects were. At first, it seemed like resistance. Later, it became clear it was something else. Indifference. Whatever existed at the boundary did not recognize humanity as something to act upon, at least not in the same way it responded to everything else. It was not protection. There was no defensive mechanism favoring Earth. There was only a difference in how the phenomenon reacted. That difference was enough. Humanity stopped trying to break through. Instead, they learned the limits. They mapped safe distances, established operational zones, and built their expansion strategies around what the boundary allowed. Earth became the center of a controlled region, not because it was defended, but because it existed within conditions that could not be replicated elsewhere. The warnings came later. Once humanity realized other civilizations were encountering the same phenomenon, they began transmitting advisories into deep space. The messages were simple, stripped of technical explanation. Do not approach Earth's borders. Some listened. Many didn't. The ones who ignored the warning always produced the same result. Fleets entered. Fleets vanished. No survivors, no evidence, no change in the boundary itself. Over time, the pattern spread across the galaxy. The warning became less a message and more a rule. Still, there were always those who believed it could be overcome. The Dominion was just the latest. As their fleet disappeared, human systems recorded every moment. The sequence of vanishings, the timing, the positions, it all aligned with prior data. There was no escalation, no deviation, no sign that the phenomenon had changed or adapted. It behaved exactly as it always had. Which led to the conclusion humanity had long accepted. This was not a weapon. It was not a defense system. And it was not under anyone's control. Classified records, restricted to the highest levels of human leadership, described the boundary in more direct terms. Not as a barrier, but as an environment. A region where normal definitions of space, matter, and presence no longer applied in ways that could be understood. Some theories went further. They suggested the boundary was not empty at all. That something existed there, not as a structure or a force, but as a form of existence incompatible with anything that entered from outside. Not hostile. Not intentional. Simply operating according to rules that did not include anything beyond its domain. The Dominion fleet had not been destroyed. It had entered a place where it could not continue to exist. And from Earth, the observation logs closed with the same final notation used for every similar event before it. No recovery possible. No response required. Warning remains active. Humanity never gave it a name. Not officially. Attempts had been made early on. Designations, classifications, layered terminology meant to force the phenomenon into something understandable. None of them lasted. Every label implied definition, and definition implied control. This was neither defined nor controlled. So in classified discussions, it was referred to in simpler terms. The boundary. Not because it was a wall, but because it marked the limit of what could be understood without consequences. What existed beyond it was not empty space. That much had become clear long ago. The consistent pattern of disappearances, the absence of debris, the complete lack of measurable interaction, all of it pointed to something that did not operate within known physical rules. It did not destroy. It did not attack. It did not even react in any recognizable way. It simply enforced a condition. Anything crossing from outside into its domain ceased to continue as it had before. Not violently. Not gradually. Instantly and completely. As if existence itself had requirements, and those requirements were not met. Humanity had spent decades testing the limits of that condition. Carefully. Reluctantly. Always at a distance that allowed for retreat. The results were always consistent. The closer something from outside origin moved toward the threshold, the more likely it was to vanish. Crossing it guaranteed the outcome. But Earth remained. Not shielded. Not hidden. Included. That distinction had shaped everything. Human expansion never pushed outward in the way other civilizations expected. It curved inward, building systems, infrastructure, and defenses within the safe region defined by the boundaries' behavior. Earth became the center of a territory that could not be invaded, not because it was protected, but because entry required passing through something no external force could survive. It was an advantage humanity never claimed openly. The warnings they transmitted were real, direct, unembellished. Do not approach. They never explained why. Not because they wanted to hide the truth, but because there was no way to explain it in terms that would be believed. Every species that reached a certain level of advancement assumed the same thing, that unknown threats could be studied, countered, or overcome. That given enough time and technology, anything could be turned into a problem with a solution. The boundary had no solution. It could not be mapped. It could not be engaged. It could not be influenced. It did not respond to communication or force. It did not change when observed. It did not escalate when tested. It simply remained. The Dominion fleet had followed the same path as countless others before it. Confidence, entry, disappearance. Their scale had made no difference. Their technology had made no difference. Their understanding had made no difference. From Earth, the event was already fading into archival data. Another entry in a long list of identical outcomes. Another confirmation that nothing had changed. But there was one detail that continued to resist explanation, even after all the years of observation. The boundary did not act on humanity the same way. Not once had a human vessel been erased simply for existing within the region. Not once had Earth itself shown any sign of being threatened by the phenomenon surrounding it. Proximity alone was not enough to trigger whatever condition governed the disappearances. Origin mattered. Why, no one knew. Some theories suggested compatibility, that humanity, by chance or by nature, existed in a state that did not conflict with whatever rules defined the boundary. Others proposed something less comfortable, that humanity was not separate from the domain at all, but part of it in a way they did not yet understand. Neither theory could be proven. Neither could be dismissed. And so the question remained, unanswered and carefully avoided. Was humanity being ignored? Or was it being recognized? The difference mattered more than anyone was willing to admit. Because if the boundary was not a barrier, not a defense, not a weapon, if it was simply a region where something else existed, then Earth was not protected by it. Earth was inside it. That truth was never included in the warnings sent across the galaxy. It was never spoken in open channels, never written in messages meant for other civilizations. The warning remained simple because anything more would raise questions humanity could not answer. Do not approach Earth's borders. Most who heard it assumed the danger came from humans. That assumption was allowed to persist. It was easier that way. Because the alternative was far worse. The galaxy feared Earth as a place defended by an unknown power. But the reality was simpler, and far more dangerous. There was no defense. There was only a presence that chose, for reasons unknown, not to act on what was already within its reach. And everything that came from outside never had that choice.